If you've ever visited London, you've probably walked down Oxford Street. It's that mile-and-a-half stretch that runs through the heart of the West End, packed with shops, tourists, and that unmistakable London energy. For decades, this was the shopping street, not just in London, not just in Britain, but one of the most famous retail destinations in the entire world. But things have changed drastically. When I visited Oxford Street recently, something felt off. Sure, there were still crowds, still double-decker buses rumbling past, still that iconic Selfridges building standing proud. But look closer, and you'll see the cracks. Empty storefronts with to let signs. Shops that used to be household names, now replaced with American candy stores that nobody seems to actually shop in. The energy isn't what it used to be. Back in its prime, Oxford Street was pulling in over 500,000 visitors every single day. That's more foot traffic than anywhere else in Europe. The street was home to nearly 300 shops, including flagship stores for every major British and international retailer you can think of. Marks and Spencer, John Lewis, Debenhams, Topshop, HMV. These weren't just shops, they were institutions. Oxford Street generated an estimated £5 billion in annual sales at its peak. The street itself dates back to Roman times, but it became a shopping destination in the late 1800s when the first department stores opened. Selfridges arrived in 1909 and changed everything. Shopping became an experience, not just a transaction. By the mid-20th century, Oxford Street was the place to go. Families would travel from all over the country just to spend a day here. It was glamorous, it was exciting, it was essential. Today, that version of Oxford Street feels like a memory. Walk down the street now and you'll see a very different picture. The question everyone's asking is simple. What happened? And more importantly, can it be saved? Let's find out. The first thing you notice when walking down Oxford Street today is how many shops are just gone. Not replaced, not renovated, just empty. Boarded up windows, faded signs, and those depressing available banners hanging across what used to be thriving businesses. It's eerie, like the street should be busy, but something fundamental is missing. In 2019, before COVID even hit, there were already over 50 empty units on Oxford Street. That number has only grown. Debenhams, which had a massive flagship store on the street since 1778, closed permanently in 2021. Topshop's iconic Oxford Circus location, once a fashion mecca for young Brits, shut down the same year. HMV, Gap, Karen Millen, all gone. These weren't small shops tucked away on side streets. These were anchor stores that defined the Oxford Street experience. What's replacing them? Well, that's where it gets weird. Walk down Oxford Street now and you'll see an explosion of American candy stores. I'm talking shops selling imported sweets at inflated prices, sometimes 3 or 4 on the same block. Nobody really knows who's shopping there. Locals certainly aren't. Tourists maybe, but not enough to justify how many there are. There's been speculation about money laundering, business rate avoidance, all sorts of theories. The point is, they're not real retail. They're placeholders for a street that's lost its identity. The root cause is rent. Oxford Street has some of the highest commercial rents in the world, often exceeding £1,000 per square foot annually. For context, that's more expensive than most of Manhattan. When sales were booming, retailers could justify those costs. But now, with foot traffic down and online shopping up, the numbers just don't work anymore. Landlords are stuck too. They can't lower rents without devaluing their entire property portfolio, so they'd rather leave units empty and wait for someone desperate or foolish enough to pay up. It's a vicious cycle, and it's killing the street. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People just don't shop on high streets the way they used to. And Oxford Street, for all its history and prestige, hasn't been immune to that shift. Online shopping has fundamentally changed retail, and Oxford Street is paying the price. In 2010, about 8% of UK retail sales happened online. By 2020, that number hit 28%. Today, it's pushing 30%, and in categories like fashion and electronics, it's even higher. Why trek into central London, deal with crowds and overpriced shops, when you can order the same thing from your sofa and have it arrive tomorrow? For many people, especially younger generations, the answer is simple: you don't. The pandemic accelerated this shift massively. During lockdowns, everyone got used to shopping online. Even people who were skeptical before had no choice but to adapt. And once they did, a lot of them never went back. Retailers that had been slowly building their online presence suddenly had to make it their entire business model. Some succeeded, many didn't. Oxford Street retailers were hit particularly hard because they relied on a specific type of shopper: the tourist, the day tripper, the person making a special journey into London. But COVID wiped that out overnight. International tourism collapsed. Even domestic visitors stayed away, and when things reopened, behavior had changed. People weren't browsing anymore. They were buying online and only going in-store for returns or click and collect. I spoke to a former manager of a shop on Oxford Street who told me their foot traffic dropped by 60% compared to pre-pandemic levels. 60%. Even on busy weekends, the crowds just weren't there like before. And the customers who did come in were less likely to buy. They'd browse, compare prices on their phones, then order online for cheaper. The brutal reality is that Oxford Street's entire business model was built on volume. Tons of people walking past, a percentage of them stopping in, a percentage of those buying something. When the volume drops, the whole system collapses. There's another issue that doesn't get talked about enough. Oxford Street doesn't feel safe anymore. I'm not saying it's dangerous, but there's a perception problem, and in retail, perception is everything. People don't want to shop somewhere they feel uncomfortable. If you walk down Oxford Street today, you'll see a heavy police presence. There are metropolitan police officers, private security, and community support officers everywhere. That should make you feel safer, right? But actually, it has the opposite effect. It makes you wonder, why do they need so many police here? Pickpocketing has always been an issue in busy tourist areas, but it's gotten worse. Oxford Street and the surrounding areas saw a sharp rise in theft and antisocial behavior over the past few years. There are also regular reports of organized shoplifting gangs targeting stores, sometimes in broad daylight. Retailers have had to invest heavily in security, which cuts into already thin profit margins. Then, there's the drug dealing. It's not as visible as it used to be, but it's still there. Certain sections of Oxford Street, particularly toward the Tottenham Court Road end, have a reputation for low-level drug activity. Westminster Council has tried to crack down, but it's a constant battle. And let's talk about the overall atmosphere. Oxford Street is chaotic, insanely crowded at peak times with people pushing past each other, aggressive street vendors, and a general sense of stress. It's not a pleasant shopping experience anymore. Compare that to somewhere like Covent Garden or even Westfield shopping centers, where everything feels controlled, clean, and safe. It's no wonder people are choosing those alternatives. Safety concerns also affect staffing. Shops struggle to recruit and retain workers who have to commute into central London, deal with difficult customers, and work in an environment that can feel hostile. It all adds up. If you want to understand why so many shops are closing, you need to understand business rates. It's not the sexiest topic, but it's absolutely crucial to what's happening on Oxford Street. Business rates are basically property taxes that commercial properties have to pay to the local council. They're based on the rateable value of the property, which is supposed to reflect its rental value. The problem is, these valuations were done in 2015 and haven't been updated to reflect current market conditions. So shops on Oxford Street are paying rates based on when the street was thriving, not the struggling reality of today. For a typical large unit on Oxford Street, business rates can run to hundreds of thousands of pounds per year, on top of already astronomical rent. Some retailers are paying more in rates than they are in rent. Let that sink in. You're paying the government more than your landlord just for the privilege of existing on Oxford Street. Mall and independent retailers can't survive under this model. Only massive chains with deep pockets can even attempt it, and even they're struggling. That's why you see so many closures. It's not that the businesses are necessarily unprofitable, it's that the fixed costs are too high to justify staying open. The government has promised reform for years. There's been talk of moving to a system based on actual sales or foot traffic rather than property values. But nothing substantial has happened. Meanwhile, online retailers face no equivalent tax burden. They can operate from warehouses in the middle of nowhere, pay minimal business rates, and undercut high street shops on price. The system is fundamentally broken. Westminster Council, which oversees Oxford Street, collects massive revenues from these business rates. There's little incentive for them to push for change, but the long-term cost is clear. If Oxford Street dies, those rate revenues disappear anyway. It's short-term thinking that's destroying one of London's most valuable assets. Retailers have been begging for relief, for flexibility, for anything that would help them survive, but so far, not much has changed. Even if you fix the rents, the rates, and the safety issues, there's a deeper problem. People just don't want to shop on Oxford Street anymore. Consumer behavior has fundamentally changed, and Oxford Street hasn't adapted. Think about what shopping meant 20 or 30 years ago. It was a day out. You'd get the train into London, walk down Oxford Street, spend hours browsing different shops, maybe grab lunch, make a whole event of it. Shopping was entertainment. It was social. It was something you did for fun. That's not how most people shop today. Shopping is now transactional. You know what you want, you buy it as efficiently as possible. You move on. The browsing experience that Oxford Street was built on just doesn't appeal to modern consumers, especially younger ones. Generation Z and millennials shop completely differently than their parents. They research products online, read reviews, compare prices, then either buy online or go to a specific store to pick up exactly what they want. They're not wandering into random shops to see what's there. They're certainly not making a special trip to Oxford Street for it. Experiential retail is the future, but Oxford Street hasn't figured that out yet. Successful modern retail spaces offer something you can't get online. Pop-up experiences, exclusive events, personalized service, Instagram-worthy environments. Oxford Street still operates like it's 1995. The shops are generic. The experience is transactional. There's nothing special about being there. I visited the Nike Town on Oxford Street, and it was packed. Why? Because it's not just a shop, it's an experience. They have basketball courts, customization stations, exclusive products. It gives people a reason to visit in person. But that's the exception, not the rule. Most of Oxford Street is just standard retail, and standard retail is dying. The street also hasn't adapted to the leisure economy. People working from home don't commute into central London days a week anymore. That lunchtime and after-work shopping traffic has evaporated. So, is Oxford Street just going to die? Not if Westminster Council and London's mayor have anything to say about it. There are plans to revitalize the street, but whether they'll actually work is another question entirely. The biggest proposal is pedestrianization. The idea is to ban most vehicles from Oxford Street and turn it into a pedestrian-only zone, similar to what you see in cities like Barcelona or Copenhagen. This has been talked about for over a decade, but it keeps getting delayed. Originally planned for 2018, it's now pushed back to at least 2025. The theory is that making Oxford Street more pleasant to walk down will bring people back. No traffic, no fumes, more space for outdoor seating and events. But there's pushback. Local residents are worried about traffic being diverted onto their streets. Bus companies are concerned about losing routes. And some retailers think pedestrianization won't solve the fundamental problems. After all, plenty of pedestrianized high. Streets across the UK are still struggling. There's also been investment in greening Oxford Street, more trees, better lighting, improved paving. Westminster Council has committed millions to making the street more attractive. They're trying to shift Oxford Street's identity from pure retail to a mixed-use destination with more cafes, restaurants, and cultural spaces. Some landlords are converting upper floors of buildings into offices or residential units. If the ground floor retail isn't profitable, at least they can generate income from other uses. There's also been talk of allowing more diverse businesses, art galleries, fitness studios, food halls, anything to bring foot traffic back. The Elizabeth Line, which opened in 2022, has helped. It's brought better transport links and more visitors to the area. But it's not been the silver bullet some hoped for. People are using it to get to Westfield or Canary Wharf, not necessarily Oxford Street. The reality is, saving Oxford Street requires more than cosmetic changes. It needs a complete rethink of what the street is for in the 21st century. So what does the future hold for Oxford Street? Honestly, it's hard to say. There are two possible paths, and which one happens depends on decisions being made right now. The optimistic scenario is that Oxford Street reinvents itself. It becomes less about traditional retail and more about experience and culture. Imagine a street where flagship stores exist alongside art installations, food markets, performance spaces, and community hubs, where people come not just to buy things, but to spend time in a uniquely London environment. The pedestrianization happens, the street becomes greener and more pleasant, and slowly it rebuilds its reputation as a destination worth visiting. Some people point to Times Square in New York as a model. It was a declining, crime-ridden area in the 1980s and 90s. Through major investment and reimagining what the space was for, it's now one of the most visited places on Earth. Oxford Street could follow a similar path, but it requires vision, investment, and time. There are already some encouraging signs. IKEA opened a planning studio on Oxford Street in 2023, showing that even furniture retailers see value in having a presence there, even if it's not traditional retail. Primark's massive flagship store continues to do well because it offers something you can't fully replicate online: the treasure hunt experience of browsing through affordable fashion. And luxury brands like Selfridges are doubling down, investing in their Oxford Street locations because high-end shoppers still want that in-person experience. The key might be accepting that Oxford Street will never again be what it was in the 1990s and early 2000s. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the future is a more diverse, more interesting street that serves multiple purposes. A place where you can shop, yes, but also eat at a street food market, see a pop-up exhibition, attend a community event, or just enjoy a pedestrian-friendly environment in the heart of London. The pessimistic scenario is that Oxford Street continues its slow decline. More shops close, more empty units appear, and eventually the street becomes known more for what it used to be than what it is. It becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when cities fail to adapt to changing times. Rents stay too high, business rates remain punishing, and the street becomes dominated by low-quality temporary businesses that offer nothing of value. The name Oxford Street will still mean something, but it'll be a shadow of its former self. This isn't far-fetched. We've already seen it happen to other famous high streets across Britain. Look at what's happened to many town centers outside London: empty shops, charity stores, and a sense that the best days are behind them. Oxford Street has the advantage of location, but location alone isn't enough anymore. What I think will actually happen is somewhere in between. Oxford Street won't completely die because the location is too valuable. Central London. Property always has worth, even if its use changes, but it won't return to its glory days either. It'll become a different kind of space, less focused on shopping and more on being a central London thoroughfare that happens to have some shops, some restaurants, some cultural venues. A bit of everything, but not the retail powerhouse it once was. The real question is whether London can afford to let that happen. Oxford Street generates enormous economic value for the city. The jobs, the tourism, the tax revenue. Losing that would hurt. But saving it requires bold action, and so far, what we've seen is mostly talk. For anyone who remembers Oxford Street in its prime, walking down it with shopping bags from Topshop, HMV, and Debenhams, stopping for lunch at one of the department store cafes, feeling like you were at the center of something special, it's sad to watch. But it's also a reminder of how quickly things can change in retail. Nothing is guaranteed, not history, not prestige, not even Britain's most famous shopping street. The next few years will determine whether Oxford Street adapts and survives or becomes a cautionary tale of a retail era that's gone forever. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.